Hey everyone, thanks for checking out my 2017 retrospective on the PS4. Now, this is a system that I'm jumping ahead with so that I can get this year's releases out. I think doing this instead of doing a top 10 list or something like that, just doing my typical retrospective format where I go through every notable game that came out that year is just a better use of my time, so I'm jumping right into that. Like my other retrospectives, I'm going to cover all the physical exclusives that came out first. I may mention some multi-platform games if they're better deserved here, and otherwise I'll get to a multi-platform episode at some point where I go through all of the great multi-platform games from this year. I may also mention some games here that came out on the Vita if I think the version on the PS4 is just much better. It's been a crazy year for PlayStation 4. If you're a PlayStation fan, there is just a ton of exclusives that came out this year. I have to be pretty picky about this list, so if I leave off any that are definitely worth mentioning, please mention it in the comments because I love to check out that stuff. It's hard to keep track of everything, including digital games, which I'll get to in a later video. There was over 450 games released on the PS4 this year, so just a ton of stuff. Let's get right into it then with the first notable physical release of 2017 on the PS4, Gravity Rush 2. This is the follow-up to the first game, which was originally released on the Vita and later got a remastered PS4 edition. It's a third-person action game that now uses the power of the PS4 to create a larger, more lively, and destructible environment. Like the previous game, the player controls a character Cat, who can manipulate gravity to move around the environment in a really interesting way. Gameplay remains pretty consistent to the original game, but it adds two new gravity styles. One has heavier gravity that makes her attack stronger and her move a little slower, and the other has lighter gravity, which makes her move faster and jump a lot higher. These styles can be switched out at any time and really affect Cat's movement and attacks. The story takes place immediately after the first game and the two-part anime episodes that you can see on YouTube. Right after that, something to tide over Kingdom Hearts fans while they wait for 3, Kingdom Hearts 2.8 Final Chapter Mix something? What's this called? Final Chapter Prologue. This is the third bundle of Kingdom Hearts HD updates, and it finishes off the updates of the original games with the HD port of the 3DS game Kingdom Hearts 3D Dream Drop Distance. It also includes two new features. The first is a 1-hour CG anime Kingdom Hearts Chi back cover, which tells the backstory of the Kingdom Hearts Chi mobile game, and Kingdom Hearts 0.2 Birth by Sleep, a fragmentary passage, which is a short demo-like game that uses the Kingdom Hearts 3 engine. It takes place after Dream Drop Distance, but follows up on Aqua's story from the original Birth by Sleep, and is kind of a prologue for Kingdom Hearts 3. Following that, we get Tales of Bestiaria. This is the 16th game in the Tales series and a prequel to the previous game Tales of Zestiria. The battle system is the same as recent Tales games, with the addition of a new soul gauge, which determines how effective attacks are. The gauge restores over time and depletes with every attack. So another Tales game, which is great. I feel like these things are coming out faster than I can keep up with them, but for Tales fans, it's great that the series is getting a lot of releases out here. Next up, one of my personal picks for Game of the Year, Yakuza 0. This was the next follow-up to Sega's amazing open-world narrative beat-em-up game, and for the first time since the original PS2 title, the company actually put some effort into promoting the series over here. This game is a prequel to the original Yakuza and tells the backstory of the main series character Kiryu and fan-favorite Majima. Like the other Yakuza games, it takes place in a crime-ridden neighborhood based on the real Shinjuku in Japan. But this time it takes place in the 80s and really brings in a bunch of that 80s Japanese atmosphere, with music, arcade games, and fashion of that period. Like the previous games, it delivers an incredibly deep story with a ton of side missions and mini games, and for the first time the side missions don't expire, so you don't have to worry about missing out on them. This is a highly recommended entry point for the series. If you haven't played a Yakuza game, I highly recommend it. It is a ton of fun. Next up is Digimon World New Order, which is the 6th game in the Digimon World RPG series. This game has the player controlling a high school student who's transported to the digital world and teams up with digital partners to fight against other Digimon. The player can collect over 230 Digimon and can have 2 Digimon partners at any time. The game has real-time battles where the player can issue commands and use items on their Digimon who are controlled by the CPU. So for fans of Digimon World who have been missing out on that series the last couple years, this is definitely worth checking out. Following that, we get Nioh, an action RPG with a samurai theme developed by Team Ninja. It's considered one of the better Dark Souls clones, with a ton of inspiration from that series, but also enough new gameplay ideas to stand on its own. The game's plot was originally based on a historic Western samurai, but it has tons of supernatural elements added to it. Unlike Dark Souls, the game uses a mission structure to break up the game. Also, combat is fast-paced compared to Dark Souls, and it features a ton of melee and ranged weapons. After that, we get Berserk and the Band of the Hawk, which is a Dynasty Warriors clone based on the long-running Cult manga series. The game covers the first 4 arcs of the long-running manga, and uses footage from the Golden Arc movies as scenes for that arc, but it uses new and very different-looking scenes for the newer arcs. Although it's not a great game, it's still notable because of the source material. Following that, we get the original release of Horizon Zero Dawn. I think it's worth noting that in December, we also got the kind of complete edition that came with this game and the DLC, the Frozen Wilds expansion, so you could get that version too. Horizon Zero Dawn is Guerrilla Games' third-person action-adventure game that mixes futuristic sci-fi robots and weapons with prehistoric elements. The game features an open world with a day-night cycle and dynamic weather. Players control the character Aloy, who is being hunted and must take on robot enemies while trying to discover the secret history of the world. Combat involves setting her traps and using her bow and spear, or hacking enemies. Overall, this is a really fun third-person game. It does a lot of new and interesting stuff for that genre, and it also creates a really interesting world and story that you'll want to learn more about. Following that, another one of my Game of the Year picks, Nier Automata. This is the follow-up to the original Nier, which was out on PS3 and Xbox 360, and the series is finally getting the love it deserves. The game takes place long after the original game and has very few story connections, but has all the themes and narrative elements that made that first game amazing. The gameplay is still a third-person action RPG with a mix of third-person melee combat and shoot-'em-up-like ranged combat, but this time it's being developed by Platinum Games, and that makes the combat much more fluid than the original game. The game is a ton of fun, the narrative is really smart and fresh, I highly recommend you check it out. After that we get Atelier Firis, The Alchemist and the Mysterious Journey. Now this is the 18th main game in Gus Atelier series, and the second in the Mysterious sub-series. Like the previous games in the series, the game is an RPG with a core gameplay designed around alchemy. The game stars the character Firis, who is training to learn alchemy and must leave her small hometown. The first half of the game revolves around trying to reach her destination within a year. The game has a day-night cycle and time passes throughout it, so there's a bit of a time limit there. This is one of the few RPG series I don't know much about. They come out so fast and there's so many of them I just can't keep up. But for fans of the series, it's definitely worth mentioning. Following that, an update to a game I'm so glad came out so more people can check it out. That is Danganronpa Reload 1 and 2. Now this is a combination of Danganronpa 1 and 2 that came out on the Vita, which has been reworked so it's easier to play on consoles. Danganronpa is a mix of an adventure game and a visual novel. So there's visual novel segments and there's exploration segments where you hang out with other characters, and after a murder occurs you search for clues to use in the trial later, and then eventually go to a trial where you have to kind of figure out who done what. It is a very fun game. It's really funny. The characters are amazing, but at the same time, with all that silliness, there is a great serious storyline, some really great plot twists, just a ton of interesting stuff in these games, and it's one of the best entry points for the visual novel genre. So if you're interested in visual novels but don't really want to just sit there and read, this is a great game that mixes that with adventure gameplay and lets you experience a story without just having to read it. I highly recommend it for fans of narrative games, for adventure fan games, definitely for fans of Japanese storylines because it is crazy like that. It's really worth checking out. Following that is Anima Gate of Memories, which was originally a Kickstarter game, but managed to make it out on consoles through Badlands Publishing, and there was a special edition published through NIS America. This is the second video game in the series, which was based on a niche tabletop RPG and card game. The game is a third-person action RPG that's not a great game, but it has a ton of style that I personally like, so I'm including it here. It has a pretty interesting story, and you control two different characters that you can switch at any time to create some interesting combos. I recommend checking it out if you're a fan of niche action RPGs. It's a really interesting game. Following that, we got Tokiden 2, which is a follow-up to the original Vita title and the PS4 update, Tokiden Kiwami. This is the second game in the action RPG series by Koei Tecmo that tries to bring a Monster Hunter-like experience to consoles that Capcom hadn't been putting that popular franchise on. As a replacement for Monster Hunter, I've heard fans say it's a pretty decent alternative, so worth checking out. Similar to Danganronpa, we also got the Nonary games, which is a kind of combination update of the first two Zero Escape games, 999 and Virtue's Last Reward. 999 was only released on DS, so it's great to have that on other consoles. This also came out on Vita, and they're both amazing adventure games. Similarly to Danganronpa, they are visual novels with adventure game mechanics mixed in. In this case, you play through a visual novel segment and then you get trapped in a room and have to escape that room using this point-and-click gameplay. You are trapped with a fun and colorful cast of other characters. It's got some good humor in there, but unlike Danganronpa, it's doesn't lean so hard into that humor. Instead, it leans very hard into a sci-fi storyline. So I don't want to say too much to give anything away, but just a really interesting storyline, a really interesting kind of visual novel structure that lets you play through the game in multiple ways to see the true ending. Like Danganronpa, it is a great entry point into the visual novel genre, although if you think something like Danganronpa is a bit too silly, this one could be considered a bit more hard sci-fi. Another combination game. Next, we get the PS4 version of Kingdom Hearts 1.5 HD Remix and 2.5 HD Remix. So both of those PS3 remakes are now available on the PS4. This is the majority of the series that has been updated for the most recent generation. This includes Kingdom Hearts Final Mix, Kingdom Hearts Final Mix 2, Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, that's the PS2 version, Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep, which is the PSP game, and it includes all of the cutscenes for the 2DS games, 358 over 2 days, and Recoded. Now, if you're a Kingdom Hearts fan, this is a must. It's also a great entry point in the series. If you're someone who's interested in Kingdom Hearts, this is the one to pick up because there's so much content here. All the great games are here. So I recommend picking it up, especially if you're someone who played Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 but didn't play Birth by Sleep. This is definitely something you should check out. Following that is Persona 5. So I'm kind of surprised I haven't heard so much talk about this game now that it's Game of the Year time. It is definitely one of the best JRPGs to come out in a long time, well, since Persona 4. I think it's debatable whether it's better or not than Persona 4. It is very different. There's a lot of gameplay enhancements that are really great, but also it's a lot more of a darker storyline, whereas Persona 4 was really bright and cheerful. This game is really dark, and some parts make you feel really brutal as you play through it. But overall, like I said, just an amazing experience that we've come to expect from these recent Persona games. So definitely worth checking out if you don't know anything about Persona. I know a lot of people that don't play Japanese games may have just ignored it completely. So the Persona series, even though they're typical turn-based RPGs, just do a whole lot of new and fun stuff. And it's a great gameplay experience that I think everyone should at least try. Alright, next up is the Silver Case, which a lot of people probably didn't hear about, but is definitely interesting for visual novel fans. Now, this is a remake of Suda51's old PlayStation 1 visual novel. This is the first time the game has been released in English, and it takes place in this futuristic Japanese city that's been split up into 25 wards, and you play a detective who's trying to solve a murder. It's a really fun game. The sequel is coming out this year, so if you're into visual novels, I highly recommend checking it out. Next up, the follow-up to the original game, Dragon Quest Heroes 2. Now, this is a follow-up to the original game, which was a Dynasty Warriors style game with a Dragon Quest theme and setting. This game introduces new characters and a new world to explore, and it retains all of the RPG elements of the previous title. It also introduces a new class system where the main character can change their class, which changes their weapon and skills, and it has a new series of multiplayer stages called the Time Labyrinth that you can play with other players online. So for those who didn't get enough out of the first game and wanted more, this is a great follow-up. Next up is Akiba's Beat. Now, this is the third game in the Akiba series, and it changes the format from a third-person action game to an action RPG that focuses on dungeon crawling. The game keeps its Akihabara setting, in which the player is a neat otaku who hangs out in that neighborhood. The story revolves around a repeating day-night cycle in which the players are living the same Saturday over and over. So this game is really notable for its really unique setting, taking place in a modern-day Akihabara, which is a geek mecca that's in Tokyo. It's just an area full of nerdy shops and cafes and that kind of stuff. It's really fun. It's fun to see that neighborhood recreated, and it's great to have another game like this that is very different in terms of gameplay, but really similar in terms of theme as the original Akiba's game. Next up is Birthday The Beginnings, which is a really interesting niche title. This is the new game by the creator of Harvest Moon, and is an interesting, cute god sim game similar to Populous. It is an interesting, cute god sim game that's similar to Populous. The main gameplay involves expanding the world and creating different climates for different kinds of animals to thrive in. It's a fun sandbox experience that feels really fresh, and because there aren't a ton of games like Populous, it's really cool to have this out here. If you're into sim games and want something a little different, definitely worth checking out. Next up is Dark Rose Valkyrie, which is a mix of a turn-based JRPG and a visual novel by Idea Factory. The game includes people who are key to the Tales series, including the character designer and a scenario writer. The game takes place in an alternate 1930s Japan setting. The visual novel segments introduce interrogation-style gameplay, similar to Danganronpa or Phoenix Wright, where you have to find contradictions in people's statements to figure out what the truth is. It's a really interesting mix of those genres, and worth it for people who are into real niche JRPGs. Next up is Wipeout Omega Collection, which in my opinion is the Wipeout game to own. It is a great collection of previous Wipeout games, including the amazing Wipeout HD and its Fury expansion, which came out on the PS3, and the Wipeout 2048 Vita game. So it brings those experiences to this new generation, which is great because we haven't had a Wipeout game on the PS4, and it's just a game really worth checking out. I highly recommend it for racing fans. The original Wipeout HD never came out physically for the PS3 over here, so it's great to have a physical version of this now. Next up is Final Fantasy XIV, the Stormblood expansion. So this is the second major expansion for Final Fantasy XIV. It increases the level cap, adds a huge new area and a ton of quests, basically everything you'd expect from a MMO expansion. Final Fantasy XIV is really picking up. I think it is the MMO to play right now, so if you're into that, you've already checked this out. If not, check out the original. If you're into MMOs, I think you'll definitely enjoy it. Next up is the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy. This is a combination of the first 3 Crash Bandicoot games. So those are the ones that were developed by Naughty Dog and the ones that everyone loved. Later, other companies put out further Crash Bandicoot games, but I think these are the 3 that are great and that really resonated with people back then. It's great to have these out on a modern console. The HD update looks really good. There are some minor changes to the physics, which really infuriated a lot of Crash Bandicoot Pro players, but for anyone who just wants to check out the series, this is a great pack to get. Next up is That's You, which is the first of Sony's PlayLink series that got a physical release. The game has you and your friends connect with your smartphones to play each other, and it's a fun experience like the Jackbox. Next up, we get Final Fantasy XII, The Zodiac Age. Now, this is a great thing to come out because fans have been wanting the international release of Final Fantasy XII for a long time. It only came out in Japan, and it really streamlined the experience and changed up the job system that everyone hated in the original Final Fantasy XII. The license boards have been completely redone, but this one adds a ton of new experience that makes the game way more playable. Those changes include really increasing the amount of loot you can get in the game so you're not grinding as much to get items, and also changing the speed. So at the press of a button, you can change to 2 times or 4 times speed, which is just amazing to help get through some of those really big areas and to help grind. The game really felt like a slog originally, and it's great to have this sped up version so you can actually play through it at a decent pace. I recommend it for anyone who maybe liked Final Fantasy XII but didn't quite finish it. I think you'll be able to now. It is still that MMO style combat, which I don't really love, but that's why I'm happy they sped it up so I can get through the game quickly and actually see the ending, because it is a really interesting story in here. Next up, a big win for PlayStation in my opinion, Undertale. Sony got the exclusive physical with PS4 and Vita versions. You have to order it online through Fangamer, but I highly recommend it. If you haven't played Undertale, it is a really fun, quirky experience that does away with a lot of the annoying tropes of JRPGs. There are several ways to play the game. One involves sparing all enemies, so you don't level up, but you don't have to fight enemies in the same way you would traditionally. The combat integrates tiny action minigames into its turn-based system for some really fun and unique experiences. The story and the world are real fun. It's a short RPG. You can get through it in about 5 hours, and you're going to want to get through it through all 3 scenarios. I highly recommend it. It is really inspired by Earthbound, so if you like Earthbound, there's a lot of that same kind of quirkiness here. Again, check it out if you're into JRPGs and just didn't bother. Following that, we got Zero Time Dilemma, which is the 3rd and latest game in the Zero Escape series. Like the previous ones I mentioned, this one has been updated for consoles like the original portable releases, and this game continues the story as both a sequel and prequel to Virtue's Last Reward. Again, this isn't something you're going to pick up if you haven't played the originals, but if you have played those first 2, you definitely need to move on to this one. Next up, the follow-up to Uncharted 4, Uncharted: The Lost Legacy. This game sees Uncharted 2's Chloe team up with one of the villains from Uncharted 4 to search for a new treasure. The game features a wide open area that you can explore and complete the objectives in any order you want, so it's a lot more focused on that Jeep gameplay, but overall it makes a really fun, different Uncharted experience and is a great follow-up to Uncharted 4. Next up, another personal pick, White Day. Now this game isn't that great. There are some really infuriating parts in it, but it's got a ton of style, and I love horror games, so I have to include it. It is a really interesting remake of an indie Korean horror game. It takes place in a school on White Day. You're a kid who's trying to leave a present for the girl you like, but wind up in the middle of this ghost plot involving all the ghosts that haunt the school, these murderous janitors, and just crazy stuff. There are some parts that are infuriating, but overall it's a really good stealth horror mechanics and an interesting storyline. It works in these different endings where, depending on which girls you talk to that are trapped in there with you and how you respond to them, you end up with a good or bad ending for any of those, I think 4 girls. So a ton of reasons to replay it. If you can stand some of the bad design choices, I definitely recommend checking it out for horror fans. Following that is Everybody's Golf, which is the latest game in the Hot Shots Golf series and the first to go back to the original Japanese name. It's pretty much what you'd expect from a Hot Shots Golf game, but I think we should get one of those every generation, so I'm glad this came out for the PS4. It's not quite a sim game, it's not quite as crazy as Mario Golf, but it is a good in-between. Following that, we got Warrior All-Stars, which is a Dynasty Warrior style crossover game with characters from the Dynasty Wars series, Samurai Warrior series, and other Koei Tecmo franchises, including Dead or Alive, Ninja Gaiden, Nioh, and Atelier. So, I hate having to mention every Dynasty Warriors clone that Koei Tecmo puts out, but in this case, there's a lot of interesting characters you wouldn't typically see in those series, so I do recommend checking it out if you're into any of those series. After that, we get Yakuza Kiwami, which is a remake of the original Yakuza game and a highly recommended entry point for the series. Now, it released quite a bit cheaper than Yakuza 0. I think it was about half the price. So if you didn't want to pay that full price to try Yakuza 0, this is one you should definitely check out. I love the Yakuza series, and I will speak highly of every entry in it, but a lot of people didn't get the chance to try it back in the PS2 games, and the games really rely on the storyline moving forward. So this is another great entry point, either this or 0. Check out one of them. The series needs a lot more love over here. If you have played the original title, you should know this is very different, so it's great for Yakuza fans as well. Next up is Ys 8, Lacrimosa of Dana. This is the latest game in the Ys series, which is great that it came out on consoles because traditionally a lot of these games have come out on portable systems over here. And this is a game that's really fun to play on the console, even though it also came out on the Vita. In this game, the main character Adol becomes shipwrecked on a mysterious island alongside the other passengers of the ship he was on. Similar to Ys 7, he teams up with 2 other characters that have unique abilities and weapons, and the player can switch between those characters on the fly to exploit different enemy weaknesses. The game also features a base building mechanic and defending your base gameplay, and it's real fun to find different survivors and add them to your base, and then build up your base and do different quests for those survivors. So that adds something really different and fun to do in a setting where you're the only town on the island. It's an action RPG, so it's easy for anyone to pick up and play. If you haven't played any Ys games, this is a great one to try out. Following that, another really interesting JRPG, Blue Reflection. This is a turn-based RPG from Gust, and it's heavily inspired by Magical Girl animes and the Persona structure. The main character is a high school ballet dancer who's been paralyzed, but now given Magical Girl powers and can move around again. The game features the day-night cycle like Persona, so at the daytime the player attends school and fosters relationship, and then at night she enters another world where she battles monsters alongside other magical girls. It's really the setting that makes this one stand out. That Persona gameplay is kind of creeping into a whole bunch of other games, so we'll see how long until it wears out its welcome, but it is very welcome in this game. I recommend it for people who are really into anime and magical girl stuff and JRPGs like Persona. Next up is Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. So technically the 4th game in the Danganronpa series following the third-person action game, but another visual novel style adventure game that is highly recommended. Do recommend you finish the first 2 first and the spin-off game and watch the anime because, even though it's a new storyline, you're going to want to know what happened previously. Another great fun visual novel, just a great game for Danganronpa fans. Following that is Senran Kagura Peach Beach Splash. Now, this is another really anime-inspired series, one that uses the kind of, skimpy girl costumes and a bunch of fan service to really sell that series. And that's just like an anime fighter series, but this game was something so different I couldn't avoid it. This is basically the mandatory anime beach episode, so the girls take a break from their ninja fighting and decide to go to the beach for a third-person water gun shootout. Characters can be customized with different skill cards, which give them different abilities that you unlock throughout the game, And the game features a story mode with bosses, a tournament style mode, and several online multiplayer modes. So I'm not a big fan of Senran Kagura. I have enough 3D anime fighters in my life, but this kind of water gun gameplay is something I definitely needed to check out, and I do highly recommend it. Next up is Gundam Versus. This is the latest version of the popular arcade Gundam Versus series and the first one to finally come out in English. Although it features about the most minimal effort required to localize a game, it is still finally great to have it out here. Very little is actually translated, only the bare minimum, menus and some dialogue. It doesn't really have much of a storyline, but it's still just a fun game for fans over here to finally play. The game features the typical fast-paced Gundam on Gundam combat, but now it introduces new 3-on-3 matches. Like the previous games, there are a ton of mech from all over the major Gundam series to choose from, and gameplay seems simple on the surface, but is very deep and is comparable to something like Street Fighter. So even though you can get into it pretty easy, if you expect to be any good, you're going to have to search online for tips and tricks. I still recommend it for Gundam fans, for anyone looking for mech fighters. It's a great game. It just takes a little more commitment than your typical mech game. Next up is Raiden 5, the Director's Cut. This one features a new story mode that takes place in real Earth settings. It's actually really interesting because they really put some effort into this story mode. The problem is a lot of it is just dialogue that happens while you're playing this bullet hell shooter, so it's really hard to focus on what's being said while you're trying to stay alive. But it's there. Gameplay is pretty similar to the previous Raiden games, which, like I said, are vertical shoot-'em-ups, except you have a little bit of horizontal movement. And the game features a new online cheer system where when you play you can cheer or get cheers from other players, which give you a temporary boost or clear the screen of bullets. The game features a ton of different paths through its story mode, so reasons to replay the stages in story mode and find different paths through it. It's a ton of fun. If you're into shoot 'em ups, I highly recommend it. Next up, another personal pick. Not a great series, but one I absolutely love, and this is Cyber Dimension Neptunia 4 Goddesses Online. So another RPG in the Neptunia series. This one, though, is quite a bit different. Instead of being a turn-based RPG like all the previous games, except for some of the spin-offs, this is an action RPG, and it's got a really interesting setting in that it takes place in the world of Neptunia, except the 4 goddesses from that series get invited to play an MMO. So they go online and play the MMO, and that's kind of what you're playing. So the game plays out kind of like a simulated MMO, even though it's a single-player experience. There are some multiplayer features in there, but for the most part, it's a single-player game. You have to be a fan of the franchise to really love these characters in this series, but because this is an action RPG and on the PS4, I think it may be a good entry point for the series. Next up is Gran Turismo Sport, which is a strange half-step for the Gran Turismo series. It's not quite a full-fledged Gran Turismo game, but it's still more fleshed out than something like the GT Prologues, which used to come out. Still, Gran Turismo has its fans. It is still, I think, considered the best racing sim series, so even though this isn't a full-fledged GT game, I think this is definitely worth mentioning for Gran Turismo fans. Following that, we get Hidden Agenda, which is the next PlayLink game released physically for the PS4. This is an FMV-style adventure game, which is notable because it's from the creators of Until Dawn. It uses the PlayLink service where you have to use your smartphones to control the game, so you connect through a server and then make decisions with your phones. It's surprising that these games come out physically because they really require a lot of connectivity, but if you're a collector who's really into having physical stuff, then this might be one you want to check out. I haven't heard too much about it. It's one I haven't played yet, but because it is from the makers of Until Dawn, if it goes on sale at some time, I'll probably check it out to see how the story is. Following that, we got Knights of Azure 2 Bride of the New Moon. Now, technically this is multi-platform because it came out on the Switch, but I'm mentioning it here because the original was only on the PS4, and because the Switch version is apparently a bit of a technical mess. The game is a follow-up to the original European Gothic fantasy RPG, in which the player uses different demons as their attacks. So it's a game where you get different demons and equip them, and that controls what kind of attacks you can do on the 4 face buttons. And it is a fun action RPG. The original game had a really fun, interesting, subtle Yuri storyline, so if that's the kind of thing you're into, that's definitely worth checking out. This sequel introduces a new cast of characters and story, and there's not many improvements over the original game, but if you did love the original, definitely worth checking out the sequel. After that, we got SingStar Celebration, which is Just a new SingStar game that was released physically. This time it's included as part of the PlayLink series, even though those features of using your phone as the microphone were in previous games and not really new to PlayLink, but maybe it does have some new features that are explicitly tied to the PlayLink network. So like previous games, you can use either the official wired or wireless microphones or connect your smartphones to use your smartphone as a microphone. Just another fun karaoke game. Only 30 tracks included, but you can also get DLC with tons of extra tracks. The next game is Yomawari Midnight Shadows, which is a 2D indie horror game that was originally released on the Vita. This is a sequel that was also released on the Vita. The game looks and plays similar to the original game, but features new characters and a new story. So again, it's just your kind of typical 2D horror experience. I recommend checking it out if you're into indie horror games. It's a cool kind of take on the genre and an interesting story. Next up, a notably bad title, Bubsy the Woolly Strike Back. Yeah, so the latest in the Bubsy series. This was a kickstarted 2.5D platformer that was released digitally everywhere, but only released physically as a PS4 console exclusive. This game is really just notable because of the community that sprung up around Bubsy 3D, which was basically just making jokes about how bad it was, but it's likely that attention was why a new game got kickstarted and made. So you'd think as a 2.5D game in this day and age it would be great, but it's just apparently pretty mediocre, so really only for fans of the Bubsy series. Following that is Summon Night 6, which is the latest in a niche tactics RPG series that has had very few releases in English. The game combines tactics battles with visual novel segments, and apparently the plot has the players meeting characters from throughout the entire series, so that's probably way more interesting for people who can speak Japanese and have played those original games. This game I think you could only pre-order from a couple key vendors, but it's still out there and available, so if you're really interested in it, you can still get it. Next up, a game I'm really glad came out, .hack GU Last Recode. This is a combination of the second set of PS2 games from the .hack series, the GU games, and it also includes some features that were really rare and only included with the special edition of the first game in that series, even though I never saw that special edition out at the time and thought that was a Japanese only thing, so it's great that that's out. This is a series that I love. I think a lot of people need to check it out. It's been really expensive. Those PS2 versions didn't last long, and when they were gone, they jumped up in price like crazy, so I'm glad that this is out for more people to check out this series. If you don't know anything about .hack, it is kind of that original MMO anime storyline. I think the first one to really do that, where a character gets trapped in an MMO game, and it's also kind of the first huge multimedia franchise that was developed for gaming. It has anime movies and TV series, books, mangas. They really went pretty hard on this series, and it's a shame it died out so quickly because it was a really interesting storyline. The games themselves play as action RPGs that are simulated MMOs, so the game pretends like it's an MMO. You log in, you check out message boards and talk to other people, and then you play through a game that is kind of a streamlined MMO experience. I can't stress enough how much I recommend you check out this game. Following that, a game I was going to import when I heard the name for one of our Let's Plays, but then found out it was coming out over here in English, and I couldn't avoid it. That is Schoolgirl Zombie Hunter. So, the exact kind of thing we love to cover in our Let's Plays. This is kind of a spin-off of the Wonshinbara series, which is a series I don't really love. It's a little too budget for me, and features a bit too much focus on fan service, and this game is no different. It is a budget game, it is a fan service heavy game, but still crazy and fun, and worth checking out if you're into crazy fun Japanese games. The game features a group of 5 schoolgirls that are trapped in a school that's being attacked by zombies. There are multiple melee weapons and guns, which is new for the series, and of the 5 playable characters, each of them have their own special abilities. Speaking of zombies, right after that we got Dead Rising 4, Frank's Big Package for the PS4. Now this is a port of the Xbox exclusive, but it's great that this is coming out to PS4 because this is a game that more people need to experience. It's the return of the original protagonist. It makes fun of its old games. It adds a ton of new features. It is a great Christmas game because it all takes place at Christmas time and has you fighting a zombie horde around Christmas time. And just fun for people who didn't get to check out this series. This one features all the DLC from the Xbox version, which includes the mini golf mode, which is just insane. It's this weird mini golf mode that plays like mini golf, but all these zombies are in the way and you're trying to hit them with your huge golf ball as you try and get it in the hole. Frank Rising mode, which is the follow-up to the cliffhanger at the end of the original game, and features a bunch of new gameplay mechanics I won't get into so I don't spoil anything. and also the new Capcom Heroes mode, which is an interesting way to replay the game. Instead of having weapons that break down, you get these different Capcom costumes that have preset attacks based on those Capcom characters, and it's just a different fun way to play the game. The last game on the list is Tokyo Xanadu EX Plus. Now, this is an updated version of the PS Vita game, which is the latest game in the Xanadu action RPG series. This game takes place in a modern Tokyo-like setting where an earthquake has previously wrecked the city and left a strange shadow in its wake. Gameplay involves exploring dungeons with your party, and it features social mechanics similar to the Persona series where you build up relationships with other party members. This updated version for the PS4 introduces new characters, monsters, and dungeons. So just another really niche Japanese RPG, but it's got a pedigree that I think makes it notable. I haven't checked it out yet. I look forward to playing it this year. And that is it for my 2017 retrospective for the PS4. A ton of stuff, way more compared to the other systems. PS4 is definitely the system for exclusives right now. And there's just a ton of crazy Japanese stuff out, which is the kind of stuff I love. Obviously, the channel is based around that stuff. I recommend checking out any of these games if they interest you. I also, if there's any games that you love that I didn't mention, please put them in the comments. Just remember, multi-platform stuff I'll be doing in a second video. So I'll get to the Assassin's Creeds and Star Wars and all the other games that are worth checking out that came out on every console. Thanks for checking out this episode. I got a bunch more planned. I'm going to be doing the other consoles for 2017. Also, it's been a bit of a big undertaking, but I'm going to get to PlayStation 1 next, which I'm really excited about. So thanks for checking out. I'll see you next time.